The subcommittee will now come to order. The chair will recognize himself for 5 minutes for the purpose of an opening statement. So welcome to the Environment, Manufacturing, and Critical Materials Subcommittee's markup of 3 bills to preserve Americans' access to affordable, reliable, and secure vehicles and fuels. Less than 3 weeks ago, this subcommittee held a legislative hearing on the legislation being marked up today. We heard testimony from Joe Goffman, Principal Deputy Administrator of the EPA's Office of Air and Radiation, who, in my view, struggled to justify the Biden administration's rush to rapidly electrify America's vehicles. We also heard from key stakeholders, including the presidents of American fuel and petrochemical manufacturers and the Minnesota Auto Dealers Association, who voiced strong support for the legislation on our agenda today. AFPM President Thompson warned us that without legislation to curb these abuses, the Biden EPA's policies would directly benefit our global adversaries. Why? Well, for example, China dominates the global supply chain for EVs by controlling 80% of lithium refining. They control half of all cobalt production. They control nearly 100% of refining and processing of critical minerals. And now, on top of that, they're cornering the global market on oil refining as we're shutting ours down. We need to pump the brakes on the Biden administration's policies and regulations that essentially mandate EVs on an irresponsible rush to green timeline. This administration is undermining our national security and taking away choice from American consumers in what appears to be an attempt to essentially nationalize major sectors of our transportation industry. And closer to home, our witness from the Minnesota Auto Dealers, Mr. Lambert, highlighted that electric vehicles simply do not work for many Americans. Specifically, he explained that EVs lose 40% of their battery capacity in cold temperatures, dramatically decrease in range when towing any load. He pointed out that a lack of dependable charging infrastructure that urban and rural Americans can access, and these EVs come at a much higher price than their gas and diesel-powered counterparts. In other words, if you use your pickup truck for work, EVs won't work for you. So to preserve the choice in vehicles Americans prefer and can afford, Republicans have solutions, and we're marking those up here today. First, from Representatives Joyce, Latta, Bilirakis, and Obernolte, their bill would limit the EPA's ability to issue California a waiver of national vehicle emission standards if the state's policies directly or indirectly limit the sale of new internal combustion engine vehicles. The EPA should not use the misguided standards of one state as justification to drive vehicles that the agency does not like off the road. Next, we have the No Fuel Credits for Batteries Act introduced by Mr. Pence. The bill addresses the EPA's disastrous efforts to simply make up the legal authority needed to introduce electricity into the renewable fuel standard. After heavy criticism, including from this committee, the EPA itself decided not to move forward with the eRINs proposal, quote, at this time. However, the EPA announced plans to continue working on an eRINs program that could be finalized at a later date. So to prevent any future agency overreach, this bill clarifies that EPA is not authorized to create an eRINs program. In addition, we're marking up the Choice in Automobile Retail Sales Act, or the CARS Act, introduced by Mr. Walberg. The bill would prevent the EPA from implementing the multi-pollutant emission standards for model years 2027 and later for light and medium-duty vehicles, which requires 2/3 of their new car sales, of new car sales and half of new truck sales to be electric by 2032. The bill also prevents EPA from issuing regulations in the future that would mandate the use of one vehicle technology or limit the availability of vehicles based on engine type. And I'll be entering an article into the record today, an article from just this past Monday from Axios entitled, unsold electric cars are piling up on dealer lots. It details that in many cases, EVs are currently sitting at dealers twice as long as hybrid and gas-powered models. My friends, it's clear that the American people are not sold on this rush to EV agenda. We must prevent the Biden administration from imposing EV mandates that do not align with consumer preferences, occur at a pace and scale that would directly increase costs for working Americans, and that would undermine our national security, all for very questionable environmental gain. Today's markup is a key step towards protecting consumer choice in transportation. I look forward to advancing the three bills on our agenda today, and I yield back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tomko, for 5 minutes for his opening